so great to be speaking with you today,
Thanks
Fiona.
for having me.
So just a quick sidebar. Wayfair was one of my go-tos when I was in the middle of the pandemic and at home. Like I traveled a lot, like most of us did, and I realized I had no furniture. and so I really
Did we help
needed
you
to
out?
absolutely. And oddly enough, I didn't have to wait months for like a TV stand. So it worked out really perfectly. But again, I can only imagine the conversations you're having here at the Edge Summit. You know, obviously we're talking a lot about generative AI, especially within the e-commerce and shopping experience. How are you thinking about, and how is your team, or how are your teams thinking about the leveraging generative AI?
Yeah, no, thanks first of all for being a customer. We love hearing that.
Absolutely.
And yeah, certainly within the last, I would say, year or so, right? Generative AI has become more of a thing, and how are we thinking about it as we go along, making sure that we provide this great customer experience for you when you're shopping anything that you want for your home. I would say that for Wayfair, we've built out a lot of the machine learning capabilities around decision making and optimization for quite some time. So we're very comfortable with sort of like the more general AI space, right? So now with the more generative capabilities of AI, we're looking at, hey, look, what are the use cases that would lend itself well to sort of this new sort of more generative approach, right? So, and the way we're thinking about it is first of all, we formed a little, what do you call those things? Little steering committee, et cetera, but basically putting together a finance person, the legal person to make sure that we're reviewing, and before we do anything.
We don't need finance in the room.
But you got a bunch of engineers, and that, we want to make sure that we can afford what it is that we're trying to do. But yeah, so putting together like a cross-functional team to really look at, hey, look, we're pretty good about figuring out what use cases are good for ML. And I think so it was maybe a little bit more natural for us to consider what are the generative AI capabilities and how that would help. And then the way we looked at it is like there are some that we can fast track, and those are the ones where there are humans in the loop. They tend to be more productivity enhancers. So it's not, nothing rocket science at this point, but a lot of the customer service assistants, the some amount of
content
creation for sure, in a bunch of different ways. How will that help with SEO, et cetera? And then some interesting things. One of the things I'm really excited about is the code generation capabilities that we're doing, and trying to use sort of the generative parts of the technology across, trying to understand some of the legacy code that we have. Right?
Oh, that's a really interesting use case.
So it's one of the things that we're looking at, trying to think about what are the possible applications of this new way of doing things, and trying to make sure that we can scale it. So those, I think we can scale faster because there's a human in the loop, right? Somebody who's going to always be checked. You got your coder who's going to review it. You've got your marketing editor who can look at. You get customer service agent that's still going to be the last kind of defense before anything that's generated goes out to the customer. So those ones, I think feel like we can fast track as long as we can get the enterprise readiness license and just sort of reputational risk taken care of. And then there's a whole other area that's more customer experience, right? And there's some really interesting things that you can think about, and how might that change, and how would you experiment with that? So we're doing that, but we're doing that in a little bit more controlled environment, right? So it's not on
still
our
experimenting, but in a more controlled environment, because it's not necessarily, you're not sure yet, right, how that might play out. And so obviously you don't want to give anything proprietary away, that you're working on or thinking about at Wayfair, but I'm kind of curious how you see generative AI and conversational experiences really impacting, digital commerce, right? Which has been a very sort of putting the task on the user, right? The last, 2.5, 3 decades, we've sort of said, okay, customer, you're doing the search, you're doing the browse, you're filtering, you're doing all these things, right? You're using your cart as like this save for later thing and whatever. Well, now the tables might turn a bit, and the customer expectation may change. So I'm curious how you think about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good question. I think that's what we are all, grappling with and thinking about. And I do think, so for home, one of the things that we're thinking about is, I think conversational search has a part to play, but I don't think it's going to replace completely, because it's still such an image-based, emotive category that I'm not sure. Honestly, I work in the space, but I think there's like 17 different styles. I could probably name you 2. And it's very hard for people to even describe what they want. So even if it was conversational, it may be hard, right? So I think it's going to be a mix of, I think the conversational search part will augment, but a lot of the visual, trying to narrow down what you're looking at, and some of the potentially the text to imagery, so that you can kind of see what you're describing and then fine tune it some more. I think the way I look at it, I think it's a combination of all of those. And then how do you find a way, or you can help train the customer to think about that as a new way of discovery. These are the things that we're thinking about. And I think depending on your category, maybe a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
But I think for Wayfair, being in the home category where everything is, it's a more style based. I think it's,
and visualization such an important
such a
piece of
big
it, right?
thing.
Like you were talking about your home office remodel earlier
Oh yeah,
today.
it was serious business.
And you're trying to visualize how everything's going to fit and go together. And in the home category in particular, right? That's a really interesting problem to solve. And obviously, augmented reality presents a tremendous opportunity.
Indeed.
Which is maybe intersecting when it comes to content creation and all these kinds of things. And then I think about how channels that we haven't really seen be very important in digital commerce could become very important. Like, I talked about it earlier today, shopping via your television seemed like a really bad idea and not very useful. Now having a conversation where I'm being presented in a large format something, I could actually foresee doing that.
Yeah, for sure. And it could be, again, multimodal, right? You could be, you're shown something, or you generate
I'm actually interacting also on my phone and all these things.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
You're typing something in, you're talking, you're saying something, it's prompting you in a conversational way. I think it's like the combination of all of those. So I'm interesting, exciting times. I think there's the other part around the assistant, where it's gonna, the thing about like ChatGPT, et cetera, it's like it speaks very authoritatively, and it gives you, it doesn't give you the 25 options that you go through anymore. It tells you, okay,
exactly
right here.
And so maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but do you want that? Sometimes you might be okay with, and sometimes I don't really want you picking my couch. So
well, that's interesting too. And I actually want to ask you a pretty weird question.
Sure.
Because there's this excitement of these new technologies and how to implement them, how to improve the customer experience or the user experience. And I think about, how does this increase the competitive advantage? Is that a conversation that you're having with your team about leveraging these technologies to make the experience so dynamic that I'm going to come to Wayfair versus any other sort of competitor, because the analysis paralysis is kind of gone. Everything is relatively streamlined.
Right.
And so because my experience is so much better, I'm going to default to that. And the assistant is great. The generative AI is great. It is a tool for sure, but the way it's implemented through a particular site or through a particular brand is so unique that it actually stands out and increases an opportunity for more sales, for more interaction, for more engagement. But yeah, just curious, like, are you seeing it as a competitive advantage, or just we have to evolve with the times?
I think, I think we see it as a competitive advantage if you can use it and leverage it and really make it your own, right? So I think just the vanilla, it doesn't really, the amount of competitive advantage is going to be a little bit less. And I think if you think also about what are the things that are important and create a little bit of that moat for someone like a Wayfair, some of the stuff is actually the fact that, we have scale, we have built a whole bunch of fulfillment centers where we're shipping things that are very, very hard to ship, that only, because we're solely focused on the home category, we have invested and we have that. So some of those are actually moats that are, not necessarily, they're more physical, they're not related necessarily to generative AI. But the experience you talked about, it's like, I want to make sure that I solve the basic things, like, hey, you talked about, you got your furniture in like less than a few months, right? So speed, reliability, just having the selection, et cetera, the assortment, those are things that are still at table stakes that we need to have, that you need to build on. And then we can talk about, hey, and then if you have the experience that is truly differentiated, that is really tailored for shopping for home, whether I want to shop this way or that way, and Wayfair gets it, and that's where you go, and you don't need to go anywhere else. If you ever think home, you come to Wayfair. You think something else, you can go somewhere else. It's okay. But if you're ever thinking about anything at home, you want to shop with us because you feel like besides you're going to get it in a few days, you're going to have the selection, but you're going to get the best experience, the best help.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we're really focused on.
Yeah, because it's almost like a replication of, you may go to one particular restaurant over another, right? Because it makes you feel good.
Yeah.
Right. And so being able to kind of, replicate that from an online kind of space to elicit the same feeling could be really fascinating.
Yeah.
I had a question. I mean, you mentioned, you are certainly in your category operating at a high scale. And I think about other retailers, other brands, other businesses who have that kind of scale. They have obviously a large data set, right? Based on the number of kinds of customer interactions they're having, vendors, data models around different product categories that matter to you. How do you think about like LLMs, at least at this stage? This could change, but are you thinking, I want to work with the commercial providers who are sort of specializing in this? Do you think about building your own LLMs or experimenting with that so that it's proprietary? How do you look at that?
Yeah, it actually is depending on the use case, right? So there are some areas where, again, if we talk about some of the use cases, some of the productivity use cases where it's probably in somebody else's core competence, so we will use, for example, if I do the chat assistant, the customer service assistant, I'd probably just prompt on top of a fairly, one of the LLMs, right? You pick whichever one.
They can do natural language processing for you. You don't need to reinvent that wheel.
Exactly. And it's, the generative capabilities of, say, a chat GPT versus the Google one, whatever. Pick whichever one you want. And that's where you can provide a little bit of your data over it, but then there's no point to really build up your own, right? But then there are other areas where it probably for us, it makes a little bit more sense. So one of the things that's really important, because we deal so much with imagery as well as text, is having a model that can actually go across both. And so those ones are a little bit more specialized, right? So
it's in your brand voice.
It's in my brand voice. It's with the imagery, the product imagery that we have built up a lot of understanding of over the years, just using sort of the more traditional ML models, and the way we tag and find attributes and automate a lot of the content that we get
using
from
image recognition, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that amount of data, we are looking at building out foundational models that could potentially generate or help us with either the use cases we already know about and also potentially new use cases that we haven't done yet. So I think those ones we are investing in building our own sort of foundational multimodal sort of LLMs, right? And sort of going at it that way, right? So it's like I said, it's probably a combination of both, depending on, one is a faster time to market, and maybe you can leverage sort of more generic capabilities they're still new and really worth looking into. And then the other is just it's just so much more intrinsic to the kind of products that we sell, the kind of over the years, the intelligence that we've built up about products, right? I think that's where the secret sauce is, and we feel like in those cases we would build our own.
Yeah, it makes sense. Kind of a follow-up question is, I've been thinking a lot about, one of the barriers to effective personalization over the last couple of decades has been content variation. We have optimization, we have, personalization algorithms that are pretty good, and, many vendors competing in the market who have invested quite a lot, et cetera, in developing capabilities that is pretty effective. But having content variations has been a limitation to really make that sing, so to speak. And I'm curious how you look at creating content variants. So maybe you have a couch, or maybe it's a web banner on a homepage or a landing page and things like that. And it's like, well, if we're going to personalize and test to get optimization, we need content variants.
Yes.
I want them in my brand voice,
right?
But I also want to kind of get the humans out of the workflow because it's so expensive and time consuming. I'm curious how you see that.
Yeah, I think that actually is one of the areas that we are looking into. So it could be, if you take, for example, a certain like twin bed, if you know that you're shopping for a college dorm or a kid, or it's a second house or something, so you almost want to know, based on that context, you would actually describe this product in a different way, right? You could say, hey, you could tout the safety features if you know that it's a parent that's shopping for a kid. If it's something else where it's a second home that's going to be rented out, the brand, the content voice, or whatever you call it, will be different. So those are things that we are playing around with. And so so before, in the old days, you have to create like all this different content and what are all the different possible personas that may be shopping for this and doing all of that. I think that's where you'd have a big win as well, right? Just being able to do that. And it's exactly right. It's the same it could be the same chair, but depending on how someone's looking for it and how they've shopped with you before,
how you want to market it and talk about it is different.
It could be very different.
Yeah.
And it's that's a part. I think that's the power of some of these capabilities now, is being able to unlock. And before it's like, oh, we thought it was a great idea. It's like we could never get around to doing it.
Well, all I heard was that it's been 2 years. It's time for me to refresh my office. And it's now time for me to go to wayfair.com because I'm going to get a little bit more personalization.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
yes.
I did recently get some new vinyl record shelves for my office from Wayfair.
That's really cool. I
Yeah.
actually am very pleased to hear that you are a vinyl collector.
Yeah, no, I have vinyl, but my old bookshelf was so frustrating because I couldn't get the records in and out of it without like basically having to like really monkey with it, and it was really
was
so
it
I didn't play
purpose
records.
built kind of for vinyl records?
Yes.
I mean, it's the same,
So
the exact
size correctly,
Size.
etc. So anyway,
Got it,
thank
got it.
you.
Of
Yes,
course.
thank you so much for joining us.
And they were
We're gonna
such
have
a good
tangent.
deal.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, surprise selection.
Yeah,
sweet,
and then there's like a
right?
nice little coupon sometimes that pops up. So yeah. All
Awesome.
right, we
Thank
won't
you.
hold you longer than we should.
right.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
It was a pleasure.
Joining us.